So y'all ready for this? I can't, come on. You had an easy afternoon, get on it. I am super proud to be able to announce the next speaker. I've gotten to know this young man. I guess he's older than me. You older than me? Yeah, he's an old man now. I've gotten to know him over the last few years, and the amount of heart and passion, just the courage and integrity that he has is just unreal. So please, a warm welcome for my brother from my District 6, Mason Falk, Local 2699.
Shark is deep. Hello, I'm Mason Falk from London, Ontario, Canada, Local 2699. I sit on our union's very first LGBTQ plus advisory panel to the International Civil Rights Department, and I'm the District 6 Trans Liaison. I was raised in Ohio in a very conservative family. I came out at 19 as a lesbian. I was kicked out of my church. I lost all my friends and my family, and I was fired from my job. I struggled to find housing and ended up living in my car. Shortly after, I moved to Virginia, but the laws weren't any better there. I was fired twice when I lived in Virginia, which was then and still is 100% legal. In fact, it's legal in 30 of our states here in America to fire somebody for being a member of the LGBTQ plus community. About 12 years ago, I moved to Canada, and I actually became a citizen last month. I became a steelworker about 8 years ago when I got a job at Liggett & Platt Automotive. And about 5 years ago, I was ready to begin my transition. So the first thing I wanted to do was to find out, what does my union say about this? There's got to be a guide or some sort of plan to follow. And so I searched and I found nothing. So I gathered together what information I could find from outside sources. I sat down with my unit chair and we worked out a plan. I had to become my own advocate, which takes a lot of work. But I also had a lot of support within the union, and I had support at home. My journey has been very privileged. I'm white, I'm male, I'm employed, I'm Canadian, and I have passing privilege. Transition is very hard. It's the hardest and most rewarding thing I've ever done. But for most people, it's a lot more difficult. Trans women of color have a life expectancy of 35 years of age and a 1 in 12 chance of being murdered. In fact, tomorrow is Transgender Day of Remembrance. Every International Transgender Day of Remembrance, we pause to recognize and mourn those that we have lost due to anti-transgender violence. This year, there were over 330 reported murders worldwide. So you can see how for most folks, transitioning in the workplace can be quite a challenge. Often, staying at your place of employment is very difficult. I would have given up my job a long time ago if it wasn't for getting involved in the union. As a member of the District 6 Human Rights Committee, we put together a United Steelworkers specific workplace transition guidebook. We interviewed trans workers, cis workers, union and non-unionized, researched human rights codes, and wrote several drafts. Finally, in July, we published our workplace transition guide that can be used across Canada. While transition is a very personal experience that's unique to each individual, the guide will provide information needed to understand and assist members in their own transitions. The labor movement has led the way in human rights because they know when we say all are included. All means all. We have a responsibility to combat hatred and discrimination. In my position as the District 6 Trans Liaison, I act as a contact person and a support, both for members who are transitioning, for staff and union reps who want to represent their members, and also as a support for members experiencing transition in their own lives. Oftentimes, a friend, a child, or a partner in their life is transitioning, and they want to be supportive, but they don't have all the tools. On an international level, United Steelworkers recently formed its first LGBTQ+ advisory committee to the Civil Rights Department. We've made a push in our union to increase visibility, to educate and develop contract language to protect our LGBTQ+ members in the states where they have no protection. In most of our country, the best protection you can provide for LGBTQ+ workers is your CBA. Our former president, Leo Gerard, actually sent a letter to Congress on behalf of our union and urged them to pass the Equality Act, which made me particularly proud. We've participated in dozens of pride parades across North America this summer, and we're continuing to move forward in the fight for equality. But what we really need is you. We need the next generation to help us continue the fight. Consider ways that you can be a true ally. You could serve on your local civil or human rights committee, participate in a local pride event, and bargain inclusive language and inclusive health care for LGBTQ+ members. We've come a very long way in this country and in this union in the fight for equality, but there's still a very long way to go. We need you, siblings, to stand up and fight for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mason. Siblings, it's my honor to introduce our next storyteller, Ernesto Tito Ochoa of Loco 6787 in District 7.
Hello, how's everybody doing? I'm here to tell a brief story. It's a life-changing story, and it's just express the gratitude that I have towards my union, because I was going through some troubling times. And I'm gonna start by giving you the brief history of how I came to the United States, or my family came here. I'm gonna keep it short, I'm gonna try to. My father and grandfather back in the late 50s, early 60s would make the trip from down south to the border, get a permit, and go work in the farms, agriculture in Oxnard, California. They did this for a few years. They would go back home, come back when it was time for the season. Ultimately, the owner of the farm sponsored my grandfather and legalized them. This in turn helped my grandfather to legalize his sons. Obviously, the owner, this Caucasian man, wonderful man, of course, I've never met him, but we owe him a lot. I'm very grateful and thankful for what he did. He knew that my family was gonna move on to something bigger and better, wherever that may be. My father and his brothers ultimately came to the Midwest and started working in the steel industry, LTV Steel on the southeast side of Chicago. My father worked there for 30 years. They closed that plant down, then he went to LTV Steel, ArcelorMittal, Local 1010, District 7, where my brother also works. Now I'm also part of Local 6787. I work on a blast furnace. So on Monday morning, I was heading to work. It's about 4:30 in the morning. I'm rushing out to get out of the house to make it to work. My regular routine, get my stuff, grab my lunch. My mom had packed me a lunch from Sunday. So I grabbed that out the fridge, kissed my girlfriend goodbye, and I was living downtown Chicago, South Loop, in my condominium. Go to the garage, start my car, pull out, heading to work. It's cold. And I get pulled over, probably half a block down. I get swarmed by some big SUVs and other vehicles. I didn't know what was going on. They pull me over, they come to my window, and they ask me my name. I said, yeah, that's me. He's like, well, we have an order for removal for you from the United States of America. It was ICE. They were sending me back home, to a home that I didn't know, to a home that, I never lived there. I came here when I was 6 months old. I came here legally. We flew into the Chicago on a passport because everything was legal. So I've been here 45 years. Came here when I was 6 months old, and I'm like, what is this all about? He said, have you ever been arrested? I said, yeah, this many, many years ago, you know? And he's like, well, we have an order for removal. Can you step outside the vehicle? And I was like, wow, what's going on? It was pretty surreal. They were very polite, I must say. They were nice guys. I asked them if I could make a phone call and call my girlfriend so she could pick up the vehicle. I didn't want it to get impounded. And he said, yeah, you could call her. She shows up and she's weeping. She's bawling, she's crying her eyes out, and I'm like, just take the car, I'll call you later. The ICE agents, like, we have to go, get in the truck. They drive me off. It's probably about literally a mile and a half away from my house, the federal building. They take me into the garage there, and I asked them if I could make a phone call. They said, we don't know if you're gonna get service, but you could try. I said, okay. They asked me who I was calling. I said, I'm gonna call my griever from my job. His name was Kirk Roby. He's like, yeah, go ahead and call him. Fortunately, I called him. He picked up a phone. At the time, he was my griever. And I'm like, Kirk, it's Tito. He's like, what's going on, Tito? I said, I'm not going to make it to work. And he's like, for how long? I said, it's indefinite, Kirk. I'm not sure. And I remember him saying, don't worry about it. I got your back. I'll take care of it. I said, well, I got to go, Kirk. He's like, all right, don't worry. I hung up the phone. From there, I was transported to Kenosha, Wisconsin, to a detention facility where I remained for the next few months. I stayed there, constant contact with my girlfriend at the time. And all this was going on, and I had no clue. Behind that cell, behind those doors, my family and my union were in constant contact throughout this ordeal. And to say that they had my back is an understatement, you know? I called my girlfriend one day, and I'm like, hey, what's going on? It's court date. And she's like, yeah, we got hundreds of signatures for a petition that your union started. And I said, who started this? She's like, everybody, Tito. And I was overwhelmed, you know? It's emotional, especially when you're going through troubling times. And I said, all right, well, I gotta go. I go to court, my first court date, I remember. I'm hoping for a bond. I get there and the officer tells me my monitor doesn't work, but they could see me, I can't see them, because I'm still in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Everything is through video and camera. And I can't see them. I didn't know who was in there. I could just hear the voices, and it was very brief, very quick. I called my girlfriend later. I said, hey, what happened at court? You know, I didn't even understand what was going on. She goes, you know how many people came to your court there? I said, no, I had no clue. I can't see. She's like, a lot of your union members were there. And I said, oh, that's great. So moving on to the last court date. This was the deciding day if they were gonna send me back to Mexico. Normally, every day you'd hear on Thursdays, you hear the chains rattling and people shackled and they're leaving. They're getting sent back to their countries, you know? They were sending me back to a country I didn't know. I only go there as a tourist to the same places that you may have gone to, Cancun, Acapulco, Playa del Carmen, Baja California. I never lived there. I was simply born there. And I go to court, and my monitor's working, and I remember clearly, I sat down, they turned the man around, the officer told me, do not say a word. I said, you don't have to worry about me talking, I have nothing to say, you know? I'm scared for my life right now. It's a scary moment. And you see my family walks in to the right, and they're all weeping. Then my 14-year-old walks in, he was 13 at the time. And I see him crying his eyes out, and it was just overwhelming to me. And then after that, one by one, you see all these union members walking in. And they filled the second row, the third row, the fourth row. Every single row in that courtroom was full. Every single row. Even the standing in the middle section, they brought in other chairs. And to say, my president of my union, Pete Trinidad, was there, Sarah. To say that the overflowing show of support was overwhelming and I was in disbelief, I don't know how to explain it, you know? That my outcome was probably changed because of that, because I know the judge had to see something. Maybe I didn't see it, but someone had to see it. He said, he went through the whole motions. I'm still at all. And said something to the prosecutor, and he said a couple of things I don't really remember, but I remember him saying, what have you done since your troubled times? And I said, I went to school, got my degree in accounting, got a job at the mill, ArcelorMittal, been there going on 8 years, own a couple properties, that's all I've done. And he looked at the prosecutor and he goes, order to cancel removal, granted. So he canceled the removal. And yeah, it was an overwhelming feeling. He canceled it, and I got to go home free that day. And I'm just very grateful and thankful to my local, Pete. And it didn't go in vain because he also, through the bargaining agreement of 2018, the contracts that we just went through, he brought it to the international board, and it's actually language in the contract that states that if wrongfully detained, the company will hold your job upon your release. And I'll tell you what, that took a lot of pressure off of me. Thank you.
Thank you, Tito. That was very inspiring. Our next storyteller will be Jessica Rios Vinier of Local 6315 of Puerto Rico, who works in our Strategic Campaigns Department.
It's gonna be hard to tell my story after that. The first words my local president ever said to me were, "You're a strange creature." I had worked as a temporary employee during 5 years for the biggest media conglomerate in Puerto Rico. Even though I worked at the newspaper that every recent graduate dreams of working at, I had no job security. Every 3 months during 5 years, I went through the excruciating process of not knowing if I was gonna have a job the next month. For 5 years, I had no benefits and no health insurance. And everything I heard about the union was how they wanted us to be the ones getting laid off. I had no knowledge of what being in a union meant. I have no union family members. And in Puerto Rico, there are two common misconceptions about unions. Local unions are just greedy troublemakers. American unions are too soft. I was an ambitious young reporter. I busted my ass, every single day and dreamed of being the best. I dreamed of uncovering Watergate stories and winning a Pulitzer Prize. And all I could see was a group that hated us, a group that put obstacles to all of our opportunities of growth. I was willing to work for free because I truly believe that's what our industry needed. That's what I needed to do to be successful. One day, they were laying off dozens of employees from different departments, and the newspaper director held a meeting with all of the contract employees and told us that they wanted to give us a permanency, but the union didn't want us. You're going to join a group now that doesn't want you here, were his exact words. That was incredibly frustrating. These people that didn't want us there, that didn't want me there, were the people that we worked side by side every day. We're supposed to be our friends. So it turned the atmosphere in the workplace into this division between eager young employees that just wanted to grow and had big dreams, and people we thought were just protecting old, lazy employees. So after all we went through, and after I got my permanency, I thought, if I can have the least bit of control in my job, I'm going to take it. So I went to the secretary of the local, and I asked her what I can do to get more involved. She invited me to my first union assembly, and it turned out it was an election nomination assembly. I sat there for the first time and was actually nominated for the grievance committee. That's when I met my president. I was a strange creature because it was so rare that a young woman with no union experience would voluntarily ask to be more involved. I lost the election because I was too scared to campaign. My coworkers started telling me to be careful. You don't want them to think you're a troublemaker. You don't want to damage your name so early in your career. You have so much potential to grow here. Are you sure you want to be active in the union? Those comments were coming on from every corner, every day. So even when you say, yeah, I don't care what they say, those things are in the back of your mind. I had this internal struggle between my dreams of being a successful, respected journalist and my desire to protect my job. I always thought that if I worked hard enough, my boss would save me when layoffs came. They always find loopholes, but they didn't. My union saved me. One of the grievance committee members that had more seniority resigned to her position so that I could have it and be protected by the seniority the grievance committee members had. And even then, it was hard for me to defend the seniority, to defend that language. I couldn't understand it. And I made sure that my board knew that. All of my friends came in the same time as me. We were in the bottom of that line. How can I say, yes, you deserve to be laid off just because you had less time there? But even then, my president saw something in me. He believed in me even before I believed in myself. He put me in a next generation committee that didn't really exist at that point. And he started sending me to every education opportunity the union offered, including the Leadership Scholarship Program. I learned, and I learned, and I read, and I learned, and I asked all the uncomfortable questions I could think of. My stereotypes vanished. I had been transformed. I learned and saw firsthand the true colors of my company, how inhuman they were every time layoffs came, and like how they waited 2 years after I got hit in the head by a rock and maced with expired gas while working on a protest for them to give helmets and gas masks to journalists and photographers when they were going to work. 2 years. Still, that didn't mean the old school members respected me. They didn't really want to try new things, new ways of fighting. They were sure they knew it all. And it was their way or the highway. I was yelled at, disrespected, told I knew nothing, told I was too weak, too much of a girl. But I didn't let that discourage me, so I kept educating myself and fighting for my members and what I thought was correct. I learned the importance of this unity, and my passion for the labor movement grew like my passion for journalism. In 3 years, just 3 years, I went from being a guard to being vice president to working for the International. I'm still learning every single day. I'm still learning every single day. I'm still trying to prove myself in this old man world. Some say if you can't get a seat on the table, build a new one. So that's what I did. I learned enough and educated myself enough to erase those prejudices and build the highest, longest, most inclusive table I could.
I love you, girl. I got to meet Jess a few years back, and the amount that she's grown, her passion is... I do have something to say, though. Why are we so quick as young women, to be labeled as troublemakers, to be labeled as loud, to be labeled as angry? Why can we not just be passionate like the men are? Why are we troublemakers? Why can't we be ourselves? So thank you, Jess. That was inspiring. So next up, Randy Weaver Pearson from our rapid response team. Randy.
It started with a trip to the on-campus health center. I was in my last year of nursing school, far away from home, pursuing my dream to a career where I would help people. I thought I had a cold that I couldn't kick. Maybe it was mono, I wasn't really sure. And the doctor there agreed. So he sent me back to my dorm with antibiotics, told me to rest, and said it would get better. Weeks went by and it progressively got worse. I had no appetite, I was dizzy, and I ended up having excruciating stomach pain. So I went back to that on-campus health center, and after hours of lab work and x-rays and ultrasounds, they told me I would need more testing and treatment that they couldn't provide. They thought I had cancer. So decisions had to be made. You see, when I went to college, the ACA hadn't even been thought of yet. I wasn't covered on my parents' health care plan because that wasn't an option for them. The medical insurance I did have was basic. It was an add-on to my tuition every semester, and it covered things like a cold or birth control, a sprain or a broken bone. It was insurance light, right? It covered all the things that young, healthy adults should need, but I was different. Testing and radiation and doctors and hospital bills that would stay with me for decades was what I needed. And in the end, the only decision I really had was to move home and fight this disease. So I moved back to Ohio. I lived with my grandparents and I got treatment. Week by week, month by month, I watched my medical debt balloon out of control. But those bills were saving my life. I worried all the time about how I would be able to pay them, and the student loans that were in forbearance that I knew would come due. I was a wreck. I was sick. I was depressed. Anxiety was a part of every single day. The icing on the cake came when, by all accounts, my treatments were done, I was physically better and healed, and that's when they told me it would be years before I could work in a hospital as a nurse. My immune system had been so compromised that I was never going to be able to do direct patient care until that had been built back up. My dream of being a nurse would have to wait a while longer. The only thing I had training to do, the degree I had spent nearly $100,000 to get, was useless. So the bills came and I floundered. I waitressed and I babysat. I lived with my grandparents and I wasn't sure what my next step in life would be. And that's when my grandfather came to me and gave me some direction. He told me that the refinery that he worked at was hiring. That refinery was part of my family's history. From the time it was built, almost 100 years before, we had somebody working there. My grandfather and his father before him all worked at that same facility. My grandfather told me he knew it wasn't my dream or probably even something I'd ever considered doing, but it was a good job where I could make an honest living and have essential benefits like health insurance. He told me that if I got a job there and decided it wasn't for me, at some point in the future, when the time was right, I could go back to nursing. So I applied. I got hired at Sunoco Toledo Refinery in January 2006, and I became a member of USW Local 912 and a fourth-generation oil worker. I would carry on the tradition, the legacy. We were legacy hires, as they called it. It was a great job, and I really enjoyed it. I went to union meetings, and maybe for the first time I realized why my grandfather was able to help and support me throughout my life. The union made that possible. And if my story had stopped right there, it would have been enough. But it didn't. As my luck would have it, in 2010, my husband at the time, who was deployed to Afghanistan, was severely wounded. When he got medevaced back to the US, we spent over 6 months at Walter Reed in Washington, D.C., where I watched him go through over 30 surgeries and suffer from some pretty severe PTSD. But when I was there, it occurred to me that I was really lucky. We had a decent savings because of that union job that I had. We didn't have any kids, and I had an aunt that lived close, so I didn't have to worry about paying for a room where we stayed because family housing was full. I didn't have to worry about losing my health insurance because my contract covered that. I didn't have to worry about losing my job because my contract covered that too. Every other day as I sat in waiting room after waiting room, I would encounter spouses and families that had to fly in for a weekend, a day or two, to be with their loved one while they were getting treatment because they had to worry if they would have a job to go back to, if they had childcare. I was shocked and saddened and moved to do something. So, as all union members do, I began to organize. If a spouse had to leave and their loved one was to have surgery while they were away, I got a phone number and made sure to visit that military member after surgery to make sure that they didn't need anything. And then I called and let their spouse know what their status was, what was going on. If childcare was needed and I had the extra time, I would watch the kids, and I recruited other spouses and family members to come and do the same thing because it was important. But it wasn't enough. I knew that we needed to appeal to those in charge to get more support for spouses and families of military members. And it was there that my interest in legislation really began. So I started talking to legislators, to military leaders, to plead my case in the case of many other families around me. I saw the power that could be gained by engaging members of Congress. Some gains were made, and the fire to pursue my dream of helping people that had started years and years before was reignited. When I got back to work in my local, I knew I wasn't done. I'd been to a few years of Women of Steel leadership and through the Leadership Scholarship Program, and I knew that our union had a program where I could put my interest in legislation to work. I joined our local's Rapid Response Committee, and soon I was the chair. I was learning and engaging and using my voice to weigh in on legislation that affected all working people, from actions on equality to trade, for health care to safety and environmental issues, and everything in between. I made sure that my voice was heard and that our local was educated. When that work led to the opportunity to work for the International as the District 1 Rapid Response Coordinator, my dream had come full circle. I was going to get paid to do the work that I was volunteering to do. I was going to be able to make a difference, to help people in a way I had never dreamed of or imagined. But look, my story isn't unique. My journey was fraught with adversities I had to manage, but I worked hard and I did the best I could. And in the end, my union, our union, saw something in me and opened the door for me to do the work that I love and to live my dream. I'm a proud member of USW Local 912, and I am blessed to be able to work as a District 1 Rapid Response Coordinator.